Farms and wilderness are the focus of today's stories. Prepare for creatures that lurk in these remote places that appear to savor the pain in your eyes as they torment you and your friends. So find your nearest local abandoned farm and bring some camping gear. It's time to enjoy these terrifying and allegedly true stories. And hey, don't forget to send me your scary trucker stories soon at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. And check out eeriecast.com for more creepy podcasts. Now, let's begin. Flesh Pedestrian sighting in Northwest USA. From K. Salami. I think we all fell into weird research phases during quarantine. I know I did. I had such boredom I began to research Native American folklore. I've always had a vast appreciation for Native American culture and a large obsession with cryptids and horror. My boyfriend is Native American. He's taught me a lot about his culture, but I wanted to learn more about their horror stories. I stumbled upon one of the most common cryptids in Native American folklore, the Flesh Pedestrian. Some of you may not be familiar with this particular title for the creature. I suggest looking it up, but don't think too hard and long about it, and don't say its name out loud. This is what I was taught by my boyfriend. He also advised me not to look too deep into their history and to avoid obsessive reading about this specific creature. That didn't work. I couldn't stop listening to stories about it, reading about their origins, what makes them who rather than what they are. Either way, the story I came here to tell begins at night. I'd been lying in bed reading r/no sleep when my boyfriend texted me. He asked if I wanted to go over to his brother's house. I responded, sure, why not? He and his friend drove back into town from the rural farmhouse to pick me up and grab a pizza for us. We laughed and joked on our way back to the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, we made it to the road his brother lived on. We made the right-hand turn and the headlights drifted over the darkened cornfield, illuminating it. But in the middle of the field stood a tall, pale figure, hunched over, its back to us. My heart sank. My boyfriend and I instantly knew what had found us. However, our friend did not. He began to exclaim at the sight of the being. Holy crap! Did you guys see that? Why aren't you reacting to that thing? At which point I told him very quickly and in a stern voice, listen, that thing you just saw, you've got to stop thinking about it, talking about it, and don't go looking for it in that field. We're to act like nothing happened. We're going into the barn, closing the door, eating, and working on the truck. The barn doors are to stay closed, and we only open them if we know who's on the other side. He looked at me as though I had just spun my head backwards like The Exorcist. What the heck are you even talking about? What's the big deal? He asked. All I could say to that was, please just listen to me and trust me on this. After the ground rules were laid down, the rest of the night goes on and we almost forget about what happened. Almost. A while later, after a couple of beers, I needed to use the restroom, and I wasn't too keen on doing it outside. So I asked my boyfriend to accompany me into the empty farmhouse so I could use the facilities. His brother was at work at the time, and his brother's dog was at his grandparents' house about 20 minutes away. We walk up to the dark, silent house without incident. Quickly, I used the bathroom. When I was done, my boyfriend raided the fridge for anything worth eating. I wandered the empty, quiet bachelor pad. I looked through the kitchen window, and I noticed a light bouncing around behind the barn about 10 yards into the farm field. Who or what the heck was out there? I freaked out, calling my friend who had been left in the barn. I see the light move up to his head as he answers the phone. He was out there with his phone light on, looking around. I demanded to know what the heck he was doing, considering the strict list of rules I'd given him after the incident in the car. Yeah, I know, but I swear I could have seen Ripley in the field. Ripley is the name of my boyfriend's brother's dog that wasn't supposed to be home. The dog was most assuredly with her grandparents 20 minutes away from home. All of this was known by the friend. In complete awe, I told him to head back to the barn. We then met at the entrance and walked back in together. I asked what the heck he was doing. He explained, "I went outside to use the bathroom, and as I was doing so, I saw something moving around in the field. I couldn't help but think it was Ripley, and I felt the need to go after her and get her. But after you called, it was like I snapped out of a trance, realizing Ripley wasn't here. But I already knew that before I even went to the bathroom. It was so strange." At this point, my boyfriend and I are darn near in hysterics. We peeled out of the driveway so darn fast. As we left, I told our friend to just forget about what happened and to not bring it up again tonight. When we were gone and safe, I eventually explained to him that I think he had been lured out to the field by a flesh pedestrian, which had intended to separate him from us using the illusion of the dog our friend was familiar with. Our friend, if he had gotten far enough away from us, it would have attacked him. Our friend thought I was completely insane. However, this still chills me to the bone. I knew the consequences of researching these creatures. I'd been reading and listening to stories of those who had been in the presence of them for days at that point. I can confidently say that nothing good can come of it. Beware of these creatures, for if I hadn't educated myself, I'm sure my friend could have been prey that night. Our next story today is an update to a previous story from almost a year ago. So to make sure everything makes sense, I'm going to go ahead and add the original story here. Then after that, I'll go ahead and read the update. Enjoy. Hayfield Stalker from Crepuscular Creature. It was around the beginning of October of 2020 when I first saw it. I was sitting outside with the cats. I live on a small farm in West Michigan, and my uncle had planted a new hayfield that summer. We'd seen plenty of coyote, a bobcat or two, and even a few cougars, but nothing like this. As I was sitting outside with the cats, my eyes wandered to the cows in the pasture, who were acting strange. They were huddled in a protective circle with the younger ones in the middle, as if they sensed a danger or a storm coming. I was about to go in the house and tell my grandma, but that's when I saw it. This creature was stalking across the new hayfield. Its body and stride reminded me of a coyote, but it had an oddly long tail and small big cat-like ears. I was confused by the build of it, but what confused me more was the coloration. This creature was pure black. I instantly thought it was melanistic, which is basically the opposite of albinism. The animal stalked to one end of the hayfield before turning and walking back to the other, disappearing in the tall grass before reappearing a short time later and doing the same thing over and over again. It just continued to pace as I watched it, adding to the confusion of it all. Now I did find an odd paw print in the driveway, which leads to the new hayfield near the beginning of spring. It looked like a cougar paw print, but the shape was off and the claws were visible and looked similar to a canine's. This paw print showed qualities of a feline and canine, which was very confusing since a crossbreed between the two was impossible. When the creature didn't reappear after heading into the tall grass at the side of the field for the final time, I went inside and told my grandma, who didn't think much of it unless it was posing a threat to us or our animals. I saw the creature pacing back and forth every few nights. It happened so often the cows got used to it and no longer huddled together. I think my grandma saw it one night because I wasn't allowed to go outside at night anymore, which bummed me out. I did try and get a picture of it one night, but my phone camera doesn't zoom in that much, and all the pictures were blurry, causing the creature to look like a blurry black dot against a chaotic green background. I'm unsure of what it is still, but I'm not willing to go out there and find out. Update. It came back. From Crepuscular Creature. You may recall the previous story I submitted about the creature in the hayfield. Well, it had disappeared for some time, and nothing else came of the situation. So I thought it left for good, or maybe it was even killed by someone during hunting season or in defense of livestock. I was clearly wrong. It was a cool morning in the early spring of 2022. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, the cows were still lying down, and dew was thick underfoot. I exited the front door with the intent of checking the live traps I'd set to catch the raccoons, who had been killing our chickens and ducks, taking the eggs. But my intent changed rather quickly. As I walked towards the duck and chicken pens, movement from inside one of them caught my eye. I froze up at first. Now, I'm one of the more paranoid types of people, so I was already mentally panicking. What if it was a raccoon? What if it was a weasel? My thoughts spiraled out of control as I tried to think up a plan to go grab the pellet gun and get back to the duck and chicken pens without the critter noticing me. This made me unaware of the true situation at hand. When I finally snapped back to reality, I was just about to turn and go back to the house, but a low growl made me pause once more. I turned my head to look back towards the chicken pens. My eyes widened as I saw a large silhouette sneaking along the side of the pens. I had my phone with me to use the flashlight, so I did the smartest thing ever and pointed my light right at the animal, hoping to blind it. I had originally expected to see a coyote, or possibly a bobcat, but what stood squinting in the beam of my flashlight was neither of those critters, nor any other native one. No, this creature had longish, dusty gray-brown fur covering its body, with a small patch of lighter gray painting its chest, and its overall physique reminded me of a big cat. But something was terribly off. As my eyes trailed over this thing, I noticed it had a long muzzle, paws, and amberish green eyes like a wolf. Yet it had rounded ears and a long tail like a cougar or snow leopard. In the few moments I got to look at it, I saw just how skinny it was, yet muscles still filled out its slim frame. It was clearly an apex predator in the animal world, so I was right to have been paranoid. I was still frozen then, not knowing what to do, faced with this cougar-wolf hybrid thing. Luckily, God must have been on my side. I heard the front door open, and my grandma yelled at our dog, Sunny D, to go to the bathroom. Upon hearing and eventually seeing Sunny D, this strange animal laid its ears back and fled towards the old barn, then out into the pasture, only disappearing from my sight when it reached the hayfield. I was completely shaken, to say the least, both confused and terrified at what I'd just seen and experienced. Now, Sunny D is an older dog, so she can't see or hear very well. But she came running towards me once she realized I was outside, her tail wagging like crazy. I let out the breath I didn't even know I was holding in, and I happily pet the dog, relieved that the thing left us alone and chose to run off instead of fight, as that could have been a bloody ending. I later told this story to my grandma, which got me banned from checking the live traps before school or staying outside too late. But I wasn't too disappointed. I still don't know what that creature was, but I do still see it every now and then, stalking the hayfields, up in the trees, or basking in a small patch of sun on the fence row. It also seems to know where I set up trail cams, or it just never uses the routes I put them on, as I haven't been able to catch a picture of it, unless the dark tail tip in the corner of a picture I got a few weeks ago belonged to it. Luckily, none of our animals have been harmed by this thing, so I'm not sure if it's actually a danger or not, though I can guess it's because of the way it acted towards me. I dread the day it hurts or possibly kills someone or something, as it will most likely be one of our farm animals, family members, or family friends. I just pray that the next person to encounter it is as lucky as I was. Not many people believe me about this creature, but I don't mind. It's not every day you come across something like that, something you can't find any explanation for. Thunderbird in Oklahoma farmland. From Anonymous. I'm a resident of southern Oklahoma, and I live far out in the countryside where farmland is most of all there is around. I have lived here from when I was 10, when my parents moved from the big city life of New York out to the Great Plains for a drastic change of scenery. Since the move, they've been happier and generally more agreeable in all aspects of life. Sometimes the hustle of the city isn't for everyone. For those who don't know, Oklahoma is a very hot and dry place for most of the year. It can get brutally cold in the winter, and the rains are few and far between. On the rare occasion that a storm does roll in, they're quite something to behold. The landscape being mostly flat and far-reaching lends to being able to see massive storms slithering in across the sky. Claps of thunder rumble the pebbles on the gravel road, and bolts of lightning that are like fireworks on a blank canvas. Ever since I can remember, this has been my favorite kind of weather, until one day that I will never forget. My younger brother Sam and I were taking a weekend hike in southeastern Oklahoma, where the region is most forested, around the Ouachita Mountains area if you're familiar with that location. We're both big fans of the outdoors, taking advantage of the beauty that nature has to offer. The Americas have such a vast amount of differing ecosystems within them, and we enjoy exploring them all at our leisure. At the time, I was 29. My brother was 21 years old, and while the age gap between us was large, we still managed to get along just fine. We weren't without our arguments on our previous trips, but these tend to level out as we both aged. The outdoors have always bonded our family, and we all seem to relax more once we actually get out on the trails. It's almost like taking a solo trip, but just having another body with you in case something goes wrong. This area of southeast Oklahoma is more heavily forested, full of hilly areas that eventually became the Ouachita Mountains. This region gets much more rain and is packed with lush foliage. It also has more elaborate wildlife than we're used to out in the plains. Pine and oak trees are the most populous in this area, and when they grow undisturbed, they get huge and are magnificent in all their glory. All of this being a welcomed change from the flat prairie. We felt like being in a different world while we drove out east into the woods. After a late start from our B&B, Sam and I were making our way up the rear end of one of the vistas where we had planned to camp overnight. We'd imagined a stunning view would be waiting for us at the top. However, we were beginning to lose daylight, and we could feel the winds beginning to change. The breeze was always a welcome relief, but it grew stronger and stronger as we neared the top of the hill. As the wind blew, I could begin to smell the air changing to that recognizable scent and that texture you feel before a storm is about to happen. This, paired with the clouds that became darker and more threatening, was a sure sign that we were running out of time. "Looks like rain," I said to Sam, who was walking ahead of me. "You've got to be kidding me," he turned and said with a sigh. I shrugged my shoulders at him in an effort to sympathize with his frustration. "We're almost at the top of the ridge, and we still have to set up our tent before it pours." He spoke again, resting his back against one of the oak trees. "I know," I spoke again. "The weather looked completely clear for the day. Maybe this will pass us by, but we should at least pick up our pace if we want to get a good view." Our hiking relationship has always worked quite well. Sam's always been in charge of navigation and timekeeping, and I was more the practical type. I always did my research on the region for what kinds of things were edible, what the conditions were like, and generally reading the signs that nature was giving in the moment. After my encouragement, Sam nodded, and we pressed on to climb the ridge. With every passing moment, the clouds became darker and the air became heavier. I knew we didn't have much time before we got soaked, so I started taking even bigger strides, walking with my weight held forward in an effort to quicken our pace. We would normally take a break by this point, but we wasted no time in trying to reach the top, while our backpacks grew heavier with each step we took. Finally, after what seemed like days of speed walking, we began to see more sky opening up on the horizon as we came up on the vista. The view was literally breathtaking, as we both gasped for air that the atmosphere tried to squeeze from us. The clouds above were enormous and full of water, which threatened to drop on us at any moment. We were able to see the tops of other hills and the lowest points in the valleys, just like something from a storybook. Filled with exhilaration and excitement, I neared closer to the edge, trying to look farther down the mountainside. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew me over. I fell to the ground in an effort to stay away from the edge of the cliff. As I felt powerless and scared, my brother laughed at me. My expression was one of shock while I sat on the ground. As if it were a climax to our hard trek, A thick bolt of lightning shot out from the clouds, followed by a roll of thunder that rattled in our chests. We looked at each other, knowing what had to come next. Without a word, we went to work on setting up our tent and pulling out our equipment from the backpacks. The wind was whipping through the trees now, and we could hear the birds making their last songs as the storm rolled in. With the tent taking shape and pulling out various parts from my backpack, I gave another look outward from the cliffside to the skies, which were presenting a gorgeous picture of nature's power embodied by the storm. The sun was beginning to set, and the storm dragging across the sky turned the world into a beautiful stone gray mixed with deep red and burgundy tones, like chalk on a brick wall. Out from the clouds, my eyes focused on a shape that emerged on the wind of the storm. Illuminated by the intermittent flashes of lightning, the shape of a bird became clear as it rode the waves of the sky. If you've ever seen a large bird in flight, you know how they can give the illusion of not moving while they beat their wings and stay afloat in the sky. Their mass makes them seem motionless, and while they can move a great distance, they appear to be stationary in midair. That was not the case for this bird. I watched the jet-black bird weave its way through the sky, turning and diving in and out of the huge cloud formations, disappearing from view for a moment and then coming back into my line of sight. It seemed to glide across the sky with the speed of a torpedo and the grace of an angel, beating its wings and falling through the covers of the storm. It demonstrated its prowess with ease. It managed all kinds of epic maneuvers, as if it were performing for me. My eyes darted back and forth across the stage as it danced before me, captivating its audience and holding strong against the whipping winds. Admiring this bird and its freeness in the sky, I watched with awe as it made its last rounds about the kingdom of the sky and disappeared behind a thick cloud just as a bolt of lightning came crashing down. I was speechless. I felt humbled by such a creature. I've never seen a bird move like that on any previous hike or even in the wildest nature documentaries. Its movements seemed to have had no purpose, none that I could seem to understand. I thought about what exactly it was doing, or where it was going. My thoughts instantly went to some of the best boxers or wrestlers' movements and how they move about their surroundings in an effort to recharge their energy for their performance. Having no frame of reference other than clouds, I had no idea to the true size of the bird, and with how fast it was moving, I figured it wasn't very big. "Hey, you gonna help finish or what?" Sam said, drawing me out of my trance. I'd stopped setting up and being totally transfixed by the bird, I'd paused in mid-zipper opening of the tent's front entrance. We finished the last steps and staked the tent into the ground as the wind was blowing quite fiercely now. The thunder calmly rumbled as it neared our camp. We were sitting outside the door, watching the last flecks of light sink below the horizon. No stars could be seen as the veil of the storm covered the night sky, the occasional lightning strike giving us our view of the surroundings as darkness set in. I watched with bated breath, hoping for the return of the black bird to give me another performance. But it never circled back a second time. Not long after dark, the raindrops could be heard on the roof of our tent as Sam and I munched on granola bars. The heavy atmosphere lifting and the air getting easier to stomach with each breath, we soon relaxed while the storm gave way to our security of the night. There's something naturally human about the rain putting us to sleep, either the white noise or the rumbling of thunder. The sleep you get camping in a rainstorm is the best sleep you can get anywhere, in my opinion. The light from our battery-powered lamps and the lightning strikes overhead allowed us to see with limited range within the tent. Quieting down, we listened to the rain while we wrapped up in our sleeping bags and began to drift off to sleep. At some point during the night, raindrops still pattering above, I felt this feeling crawl up from my stomach, that nagging sensation from my psyche that something is watching me. My eyes opened wide from a dead sleep, and I quickly took note of my surroundings. The tent lamps had powered off. Sam was sound asleep a few feet away from me. The lightning struck all around us furiously, but was met with no thunder crashes to match them. This tense feeling littered the air as you could hear the sizzle of electricity slicing through the night. The shadows of the trees surrounding us were like sleeping giants, moving and bending in the wake of the wind like they were taking deep breaths. It felt as if the majestic scenery from earlier had turned into something more sinister with the arrival of the storm. I'm not afraid of the dark. I never have been. I am afraid of getting caught unaware and being the last to know about something dangerous. In an effort to prove this to myself, I sat up in the tent and took the sleeping bag off my body. Trying to find the source of this familiar feeling, I moved closer to the opening of the tent, which was now zipped up tight. We'd positioned the tent with the opening facing the edge of the cliff, so that we'd be met with a stunning view in the morning. As I unzipped the tent's door, I was met with an equally bewildering sight. The cold night air hit my face. Raindrops cascaded down the door of the tent as I peered out into the stormy night. Fierce wind blew falling rain into my eyes, obscuring my view somewhat. Lightning scattered across the sky. The sky was black, apart from the cloudy forms that were illuminated by the lightning bolts. These fleeting moments of light revealed to me an enormous shape darting across the sky. At first, I thought it was a weather balloon or someone's tent blowing around in the sky, but as I watched on while the storm illuminated the shape, it became clear to me this was no inanimate object adrift in the sky. My heart became a pit in my stomach as I soon made out the object. The way it moved was planned, predatory, and primal. The sound of beating, massive wings echoed upon the wind. I began to make out the shape better, and I noticed it was moving closer and closer to the ridge we camped on. Then I realized its features were all too familiar. Feathers as dark as the night, even though they shimmered in the rain. Massive curled talons were tucked underneath its torpedo-like body, a head like that of a sickly crow, its hooked beak like that of a vulture. It moved with calculated efforts, harnessing the power of the storm, riding the wind like a surfer on a tidal wave. Making one final swoop into the sky, the creature released a screeching bellow, triggering a massive thunderclap and echoing through the night. I found myself in a horrible state of paralysis. This encounter shook me to the very fibers of my being. Behind me, Sam awoke with a gasp. He sat straight up in the tent. He soon scrambled over to the opening as well and caught sight of the avian giant. Not a word was shared between us as we looked out into the night. The Thunderbird was even closer now, circling our tent like a falcon stalks a mouse. It began to dive down to the ridge then, while it tucked its wings close to its body. It felt as if time slowed down. Its head rose, the Thunderbird's body becoming horizontal in midair, talons exposed like powerful meat hooks. Its wings stretched out like a crucifix, head aimed straight at our tent. Sam broke from his trance, grabbing the back of my shirt collar and pulling me away from the tent door, using his whole body weight to move me. I fell back to the rear of the tent as the shape of the bird began to fill the view of the door. With a sickening sound of tearing cloth, the entrance of the tent began to lift off the ground. The solid bottom of our enclosure became loose, the stakes popping out of the wet ground. The world shifted as we felt gravity sidestep us, above becoming where below should have been. We fell on top of each other in the side of the tent. We were airborne. Feeling utterly powerless, we screamed, only to be met by more furious giant wing flaps and content grunting of the Thunderbird. I caught a glimpse of Sam's eyes, and I saw something I'll never forget. The unmistakable look of defeat, sadness, fear. I'm sure the same was reflected in my own expression. Suddenly, our airborne tent was met with a crash to the side. We'd smacked against something mid-flight. Sam and I were tussled about even more in the moving sack as our rough flight was made even more rough. Another horrible screech was heard from the Thunderbird at a deafening volume. Then from afar, a similar screech rang out through the air. Another of the creatures. The wall of the tent was like a shadow puppet show. These shadows revealed not one, but two massive flying birds. Violent screeches and shrieks surrounded us. Suddenly, claws ripped into the tent, and with that, we could feel ourselves plummeting, our weight shifting from our stomachs to our throats, like an elevator dropping down too fast. Sam and I screamed. We could feel the tent scraping against tree branches now. With one final strike, our tent collided with the low-hanging branch of a tree. and our party came to a grinding halt. The sounds of thunder became distant. The birds above continued on through the air. We screamed again, this time in pain as the branches poked through the tent. They had ripped cloth and flesh. The two of us then fell through the tent. We collided with more branches before finally landing on the wet ground and mud. Sam lay a few feet from me, and I reached out my hand to grab his. Breathing heavy, we turned to see what had become of the two birds. They soared through the sky, and with every contact against each other, they clawed and speared one another. Their forms began to blur together as my eyes became heavy. The Thunderbird's calls rattled in my head along with the raging rolls of thunder, but both became more faint as they flew farther into the night and as I drifted away. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. Bright lights burned my eyes. I felt a searing pain course through my ribs as I took each breath, a strong throbbing in my head. I looked down, seeing tubes and hoses going into me. There was a remote near my hand, so I pushed the biggest button on it. Nurses soon came to my room. After a lengthy conversation with them, they explained that Sam and I were found at the base of a tree covered in mud. Someone driving on the main road farther down the mountain found pieces of our tent strewn about the trees. They eventually came upon us. They then called the police and paramedics. We'd been carried 5 miles downhill from our original campsite by severe storm conditions. I began to spout ravings about Thunderbirds, telling the nurse about the storm, the flight, and the drop. I received only looks of confusion and laughter. They told me, while I shared the same story as my brother, we both suffered injuries from the wind blowing our tent into the tree, that we were both delusional due to our shaken mental state. I'd never been so angry in all my life, treated like some child who was afraid of the dark. I'd almost died because of a real massive bird of prey that can pick 2 fully grown men out of a bolted down tent and carry them for miles in a thunderstorm. I mean, there was not just one of these creatures, but 2, maybe more out there. Thankfully, I only suffered a large gash to the head and some bruised ribs. Sam had a dislocated shoulder and sprained ankle. We were beaten, but alive. This did stop us from camping together for nearly 6 years, until after the birth of my first child. These days, we're both older, both with kids. We don't rant and rave about the night we nearly died. It just remains a bedtime story for our sons and daughters to tell on rainy nights. We take family camping trips together, but no place so remote and wild as we did in our youth. A warning to those going camping in the Americas. Mother Nature is beautiful, stunning, and breathtakingly gorgeous. She's also deadly, mysterious, and secretive. There are things we still don't know about our own planet and the creatures that live here, so it's always best to treat your surroundings with respect. I won't discourage the exploration and enjoyment of the wilderness, but I will caution you. Take every precaution and preparation you can when going into new territory, and always take a second person with you. Had it not been for Sam that night, I don't know that I would have been here to recount the story. Be wary of camping in the Ouachita Mountains of Oklahoma, especially when a storm is beginning to brew. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.